if you know something that is true, if you know that it's true and you feel that sharing that thing is the right thing to do, the absolute worst thing you can do is be silent. God gave you a voice. He gave you a brain. Do not silence yourself, and definitely do not say something that you know to be false to appease somebody. I think if more people followed this, we would have a much better country and a better world. And I think we are starting to break through to that a little.
Hello and welcome to Along the Way Life's Journey. I'm your host, Carl Buccellato. Well, we've gone through a couple of years and here we are starting a brand new year. By the time you see this show, it's going to be 2025. Amazing. Time really flies by. I have with me a young man today who's been doing this as a podcast host with great expertise for 20 years. I find that hard to believe. I've just done it for 2 years and I can't imagine him doing it for 20 years. But he's a very acclaimed host. He's probably had thousands and thousands of shows, and people look forward to watching his show every week. It's Paul Leslie, and it's his show, The Paul Leslie Hour. And so as he says, are you there? Is that right? Are you such a show? Are you there?
Yeah. Are you here?
Are you here?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Well, so happy to have
here,
you on
Carl.
the show, Paul. Paul is a distinguished podcast host, as I said. His show features primarily the arts and politics, most of the things that I love to talk about. My show is a little bit about stories and memories and things that we connect with that motivate people and inspire other people. And I'm sure Paul has quite a lot of those. You can't have interviewed so many people over the years without having many, many stories. And so, Paul, welcome to the show and happy to have you with us.
Thank you, Carl. I really appreciate it. I feel like we're going to get along just fine.
I'm quite sure of that, I especially like the mustache. We're going to get along just fine.
Well, anybody who has such a musical name as yours.
It's melodious, isn't it?
It is.
My wife has a great joy in telling people when we meet, would you like to hear my husband's name, his full name? And she always imposes this on them. And she sings songs. My name is Carlo Andrew Mario Buccellato, which is Sicilian.
Okay.
It's a long, old family traditional name.
I like it.
I like it too. So, Paul, you've been in this business a long time. You've seen many, many changes over the years, I'm sure, as a podcast host and interviewed some of the most notable people in America. Your list of guests goes on with enormous credentials. You can show that on the release stuff later. And ladies and gentlemen, don't bother taking any notes because all the contacts on how to reach Paul will be in the show notes. How to reach him, how to find his show, how to listen to him, how to write to him, all of it will be in the show notes. So over the years, I'm sure you've come to a certain understanding of what it means to be a podcast host. For me, I said a moment ago, my show is primarily communicating and conversational with people to talk about things that impacted them in their lives, things that might have changed their direction one way or another. And I find that we all have a story. Everybody has a story, and that story invariably will impact someone that's either with inspiration or motivation to do something for themselves or about themselves, and hopefully get off the couch and do something. So tell us, what do you think about this industry, and what are some of your thoughts on what it means to be a podcast host? It's more than just sitting there and prompting questions, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think a podcast host has a responsibility to be true to himself or herself, and in turn, be honest with the audience. And increasingly, I'm finding that a podcast host has another responsibility that I'm focusing on more and more, and that is he or she has a responsibility to have fun, to be joyful. It's a lot of fun, and people will pick up on it if you're enjoying what you're doing.
Absolutely. I think fun is contagious. I really do. I think the greatest thing we do for people with sour faces and depression is to help them find their own smile again, to bring it back to them. And I think you're right. That's part of our obligation and responsibility to our audience. I think we are coming into a new time in America also where podcasts are being addressed in a more formal way and recognized as something very important for this country. On the political scene, we just had a major election, and I'm sure you agree with me that major changes took place as a result of the internet and podcasts, and now President Trump getting before an audience that he wouldn't otherwise get in front of because of the radical press that kept them out of a lot of people's vision. As a matter of fact, I understand now they're going to invite podcast hosts to be in the newsroom at the White House for the briefing.
How about that?
Isn't that something?
That is interesting.
Because we are a direct line to the people they want to reach without having the editorial committee decide what's going to be said and how it's going to be said. And, you can't use that word and you can't do this. We are a direct communication with people.
Exactly. It's when you're listening to a podcast, you're listening to this guy. And I think the ones that do the best are probably the ones that are the most authentic.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is so cool.
I just watched one of your shows the other day with Charlie Kirk.
Oh.
And I watch him all the time. But you had a really good conversation going with him back and forth there, and I thought that was wonderful. But that's part of who you are. That's your skill set, to draw things out of people and bring it into a dimension that possibly wasn't said in the press some other place. So what do you try to do when you get someone in front of you, in front of the camera? And this is for the rest of the audience. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to take a cue from Paul for a moment and remind you, if you like this show, thumbs up, subscribe. The only way it's going to keep going on is if you subscribe and get enough people in there to do it. You see that book back there? I wrote that book a few years ago. That's our only sponsor. The proceeds from that book sponsors this entire show and everything that I do. So if you like us, subscribe. Paul, did I do that well enough?
That was perfect.
Okay, let's get back to you. What do you think of when you get a Charlie Kirk or you get an Alan King in front of you? What do you do when you get people in front of you like that? What goes through your mind? What whispers around? I know you prepared in this, but what do you want to do?
Well, I think you got to really allow yourself to realize that 1 second is going to become the next. Larry King, when I interviewed him, he said something along the lines of, remember, Monday will become Tuesday. So no matter what happens, you're in that exact moment. You're doing that interview. You're going to have things that go wrong where there's feedback or whatever, but just try to, realize that it'll be okay. And even if it goes really, really bad, I mean, how bad can it get?
That's right. What's the worst that's going to happen? They turn it off. What's the worst?
Right. This has occurred to me sometimes, and this is, I think, a good reframe. Imagine you're getting your dream interview. So you're Carl Buccellato, and you're talking to somebody that you always wanted to get on, and it goes so bad, it's terrible. That in and of itself would be newsworthy.
Yeah.
So there's really, you have to have this attitude of you can't lose.
That's right.
And then, of course, the obvious, listen, focus in on that person, pay attention to what they're saying.
Absolutely. I guess I'm not trained for this. As I said, I wrote a book a few years ago after I retired. I retired 5 years ago, and I wrote that book immediately afterwards because I don't play golf. And, so I had to do something meaningful with the rest of my life. So I wrote the book and it became popular, and they started interviewing me on shows like this. And my publicist said, you seem to be pretty comfortable in your skin. You're easy to talk to with other people. Why don't you do a podcast? And honestly, I said to them, what's a podcast? I didn't know what it was. I'm a curmudgeon. I'm 82 years old, so you got to give me a little credit for that. So I learned quickly, and I realized that by doing shows like this, I meet the most interesting people. And I have the opportunity. One of the things I say when I open my show usually is I've traveled millions of miles around this earth, really, literally millions of miles around this earth over so many years in business and so many years as an independent traveler. And I've met thousands of people. And they have been so inspirational to me because everybody is unique in their own way. Everybody has a story to tell. And if we listen to it, it edifies us. It brings us to a place that maybe we weren't in on our own, And so I know that for me, the responsibility is to talk to people like you and say the inevitable question. Okay, everybody knows Paul Leslie for who he is today and what he does today. But who is young Paulie? What brought you to this place, Paulie? Who are you under the mustache and the beard?
Well, I just want to say real quick, you are a knockout podcast host. You are just a natural. First of all, you got a great personality,
Thank
but
you.
you've got an ability to weave a story even when you're asking a question. So I just thought I would mention that.
Thank
But
you.
it's funny and perceptive that you called me Paulie because my best friends, and when I was little, I was Paulie because I'm the third Paul in our family. But good point, because I kind of got initiated into the world of communication or media when I was really young. I was 7 years old the first time I had something published that I wrote.
Mm.
And it was the ultimate, what do you call it? Opportunism. I I wrote this little piece and I even illustrated it black and white. And I wanted to get in the newspaper, and I figured, how do you get in the newspaper? And I thought, everybody's interested in themselves. So I themed my piece about the newspaper itself. So when the editors saw it, they told us later, this is going in the newspaper. So that was my initiation.
And you came to that on your own at 7 years old.
Yeah,
The editor must have thought, like, this guy's father, I coached him with this stuff. And then he met you or spoke to you and realized this is somebody worth listening to.
Or they thought, wow, this kid is a schmoozer.
More than likely. So, okay, that was your entree into it.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about Paul. Tell me about Paulie growing up and the aspirations that you had and some of the setbacks that you might have experienced that you had to overcome. We've all had them. So I know you have also.
Yeah. Well, I have 3 sisters. I have, I think, 2 great parents. My family becomes more and more important to me, the older I get. I just love my family so much. And I guess I've had an experience growing up of living in a lot of different places. My father was a missionary. I guess you could say my father and mother. So I grew up in the Philippines, Florida, Georgia, New Jersey for a while.
Mm.
So, and on top of that, traveling a lot with my parents, getting to do that from a young age. So that was a big deal to me. And I still have that interest in going to other places when I can. But in terms of what difficulties I faced, I would say that the biggest thing is lack of self-belief. I had that for a long time where I thought, can I really accomplish these things that I want to try to have happen? When I was going to college, I had this idea that I didn't want to study what I was truly, truly interested in, because I thought if I study that, I'll somehow maybe not like it as much, or maybe I'll find out that I don't have the ability in it, things like that. And to this day, there are still moments where I have that kind of doubt about myself, but not so much anymore.
We all have to realize and learn in life, and it's an evolution that comes with age, unfortunately. If we had it when we were very young, we'd all be Elon Musk. But it's an evolution that comes with age, that as we bring on the layers of life and experience, we come to realize that a lot of these things that seem monumental to us when we're inexperienced or untried, they diminish in size when we experience the world. You know, when you travel and you see the lives that other people live, when you have life-shaking experiences. I've had a number of them. You know, growing up and experiencing the 20th century with all the paradigm shifts that took place politically and the war years and the travel and, becoming a world traveler and meeting people. I think of myself as a citizen of the world and meeting people of every stature you can imagine, learning not only from a prime minister, but from the doorman as well. You know, there's so much to learn in this world. And when you get that, you start to realize you have capabilities and qualities that are uniquely yours, and they weren't given to you. I believe in a great God. I believe that our God is all powerful and all wonderful, and he does nothing wrong. For him to make me the way he made me, there's got to be good in there, and there's got to be a message in there for some other people to hear about looking into themselves. And I think you have the same thing. You know, that's what drives me, and I'm sure it drives you as well, to reach other people's spirits and souls and elevate them.
Absolutely. So well put. Yeah, I believe we are divinely designed, and there's this gem that we can find in other people. And sometimes there are certain people that maybe on the outside it's a little rougher, but it's in there.
Yeah.
And I think the reason that I interview people is because of that. It's because there's something inside of the people I talk to that I love. And I want other people to see that too.
I agree with that. So do you have, how much time do you have with your guests before you actually do your podcast with them?
Well, it depends. Usually my style is I go right into it. Okay. There's no warm up.
Yeah, I like that too.
Yeah.
Wherever it takes us, it takes us,
Right.
That's right. I like that too.
There have been people that I've talked to. I sometimes jokingly call the interviews that I do accounts. Like, this person is this account. I'm not kidding. There are people that for 10 years, we've been talking about doing an interview, and we still haven't done it. But I'm a long game kind of guy.
Yeah.
I'm the kind of guy, I think, I have faith that it'll happen.
That's what it takes. You have to do that. I know, there are a couple of people like you I have met in different events and occasions, and people that are on my list of guests, they're quite notable. And one of them is a renowned reporter who won a significant award for breaking stories, and she's just fantastic. You see her on the TV all the time. I won't mention her name because she keeps saying, yes, I'll do the show. I'll do the show. And we never quite make it mesh to the time, but she never says no. It's always, yes, I'll do the show. To me, that means I'm a step closer. And I'm just going to keep walking down that path until we do that show. And that's it,
That's the right attitude. And I'll tell you, sometimes those interviews that you just keep, you keep those accounts going and you talk to them. Sometimes when you eventually get it, how sweet it is. It's so cool.
Yeah. I had that with a man. My wife and I were on a cruise ship a few years ago, and we went to one of the bars waiting to go to dinner. And in walks this man, an elderly man with a cap on that says Top Gun. He was a black man, and he was wearing a cap that said Top Gun. So I said, did you like the movie? He said, it wasn't about the movie. I said, well, you're wearing, he says, I was the Top Gun. So I said, this you have to tell me, And it turns out that he was the original Top Gun in 1947. He was a Tuskegee Airman. And at the time, we had a segregated military, and they refused to acknowledge him as the Top Gun. He went on to become a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, flew missions during World War II, many, many missions in Korea, and even flew missions in Vietnam. and retired a full colonel, full bird colonel. Okay. And here he is, 96, 97 years old, full of joy and spirit, with such patriotism for this country that neglected him for so many years. And yet in 1990, one of the presidents, I forget who it was, acknowledged who he was and gave him a congressional honor. And they finally bestowed upon him the honor of saying he was the first Top Gun. So I had him on my show. It was a wonderful conversation, and it took a little while to get it going because he didn't know anything about computers. And his daughter, he had to wait till his daughter came to visit him to show him how to do these things. So we did the show. And about 3 weeks later, I get a call at my home, at my office. And I answered the phone. I said, yes. And this man says, is this Carl Buccellato? I said, yes. He says, this is Captain Len Kane. This is Captain Len Kane, United States Navy, retired. I said, well, welcome, Captain, and I'm chatting with him. What can I do for you today? He says, I'm the other guy. I said, what? He said, I'm the other Top Gun. And I introduced them together, and I ended up with a show with him as well. It was such great. I mean, he has 40 years gone by. They never knew it, never met each other. And, that's the kind of thing we can do inadvertently without realizing it. We can touch little lives like that along the way.
Man,
I often think that sometimes in the least of our judgment, we throw out a little word, a little pebble and it goes into the center of this stagnant pool and it makes ripple on ripple on ripple. And who knows how many people it will touch? Who knows this conversation we're having today, where it'll go? We're on the internet. It's going to go through the air. Who knows how many people will be benefited by it?
I like the way you talk and I like the way you think.
Thank you. Thank you. I thank you. Thank you very much. So your show is on regularly. What would you like to tell people about your show?
Sure. Well, I've been going for quite a number of years now. And for a while it was on the radio. And then 2017, I made it a podcast after people, kept saying, why isn't this a podcast?
Yeah.
And you can get it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. But something I've been doing lately, I've been posting the video interview on X, formerly known as Twitter. And it's surprising me that's getting a very good reaction. So, and that was kind of a happy accident how I ended up on X.
That's an interesting thing. I haven't done that yet. I post clips and links in Facebook and on Instagram, but I haven't tried X, and I can imagine that would be quite an audience there.
Well, I did an interview with Dr. Naomi Wolf, and YouTube pulled the interview. I filed an appeal. They immediately denied the appeal. And the actual statement that Dr. Wolf made is absolutely factual. It's true. And YouTube wouldn't budge. And the interview was for Election Day 2024. And I thought, how am I going to get this out there? People need to hear this today. And so I put it up on Twitter or X. And I've been doing it ever since, all because of YouTube pulling that interview with Dr. Naomi Wolf.
That's interesting. I have to do that. I had a little trouble myself with one of the shows I did before the election because I did a review and an expose on how people in California were attempting to eliminate the Electoral College and how they had already had a grassroots effort underway, and 13 states have already agreed to it, and what that would mean to the United States if that Electoral College were taken away. And so I did this whole expose on it with graphs and reports and so forth. And they bounced me. They wouldn't let me show the show.
Wow.
So I took it and I plugged it into Facebook and I put it on Instagram. And I started circulating it around. But about maybe a month later, we rebooted the show and they let it go through that. I don't know why, but they did.
Well, there's a name I would call them, but I won't call them on this show because it's a family show.
Yeah, I try to avoid those words too.
Yes, sir.
But There's so much we can do now. I felt really good, like I've accomplished something this year with this election by calling people to action, to get out and register to vote or get their friends to vote, register to vote. And you make sure that everybody had an opportunity to vote because every vote was absolutely essential. And I kept saying over and over again, I've been told all my life, this may be the last election ever. But this time it was really true. This really could have been the last one ever. And we had to all come forward as Americans and preserve the Constitution and preserve our rights. And I kept saying it over and over again. And people were saying to me, are you running for an office somewhere? But yeah, I'm running for an office. I'm running for an office called American Citizen. That's my office. That's what I...
Well, thank God you and so many other people were doing that.
Yeah.
Because it needed to happen.
Absolutely. When he said we have to have it too big to rig, he's right, because they were trying to rig it once again. There were hundreds of places across the country where they had aliens registered to vote that had no right. They're not citizens. So many states 13 states allowed these illegal aliens to get driver's license, not to give them opportunity for transportation, but because on their rolls, if you had a driver's license, you can get a ballot by mail. And if you had a ballot by mail, the question of whether you were a legal citizen and had a legal right to vote would have been questioned too late, and it was a mess, really. So we had to have this enormous outpouring, and I'm so glad we did. I'm an active man in my church, and I'm a Christian, and one of the things that I heard in the last election was that over 20 million charismatic Christians did not vote in the last election. And to me, I said, that can't be. We can't sit there and allow that. And so I practically bullied my pastor, make sure you say these things from the pulpit. Did you ever hear of the black robes? I would tell him, who the black robes are? The black robes were the men who, in the pre-revolutionary time, were preachers all around the colonies who knew that the colonies had to stand for a righteous ability, for freedom in God, and for freedom in mankind. And so they preached it from the pulpits, and they almost to a man, they were executed for it by the British, But they were the spark that ignited the revolution, the American Revolution. So I would say to the people that I know that are pastors, I say, you got to be a black robe. I don't want you to die, but I want you to tell the story. You got to get these people charged up and get them to vote and recognize. Jesus said, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's and render unto God what is God's. Okay? Caesar says, give me your taxes. God says, vote your conscience. If you want to sit there and say you're against abortion and not vote, don't answer. Don't say another word. You're useless. You got to get up and do your share. I'm on my soapbox again. It's supposed to be interviewing you. Well, how did you let this happen, Paul? I'm not supposed to be doing this.
Well, I've been so interested and entertained by what you've been saying. It's I didn't know anything about that, the black robes. But
interesting history. Look it up. You'll find it, I'm sure. Even Google has stuff about it, but you'll find it on Wikipedia, I'm sure. And it's part of our history. It's part of what we're called to be as not only Christians, but as members of all faiths are called to be responsible and defend the Constitution and defend our legal rights, our individual rights. Because if we can't find them in our scriptures, we can't find them anywhere. That's why this nation has been as great as it's been for 250 years, because of our Judeo-Christian foundation and the values that we bring,
Amen. Thank you for saying that.
Very important. Okay, so what's coming up that you would like us to look for?
Well, let's see. When is this going to come out?
This is going to come up right after the new year.
Oh, great. Well, something that I've been doing a lot more of, I've done more than 1,000 interviews, but I'm doing a lot of reviews where I'll either read a book or see a movie or whatever, and I create this, it's like an audio-visual review. So I'm posting those on YouTube and on X, and I have a lot of fun with it. Mostly I review political books, but, all different kinds of things. I hope people check them out because I have fun doing them, and I get a lot of emotional responses. So if I can make a review kind of entertaining instead of
Sure.
just, "This is a review,"
Sure.
like today happens to be Frank Sinatra's birthday.
Oh, blue eyes.
Yeah. So he was born 109 years ago today. So
109?
109 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah. So I have an old review that I wrote that was published in a magazine years ago, and I'm gonna be putting that out there today. Now, people can go back and watch it, but it's a review of the book Sinatra 100
Huh.
that came out on the centennial year.
Hmm.
So,
I'll have to.
that's
I'll have to watch that.
thank
I'm
you.
going to be a mercenary and send you a copy of my book there. That's in the corner. It's called "To Every Page a Turning," and it's a book that I wrote because when I retired, I realized that I had been a journalist most of my life, and I had 50 years worth of journals through all kinds of experiences, ups and downs, seeking God, retribution, new life, business, wars, near death, all that stuff. And it's all in that book with emotional content as though it were happened the day that I wrote it, because I wrote those journals the day those events took place.
Mm.
So they were still raw and real emotions. And I think people love it. And it's in its third printing already. But I'll send you a
Wow.
copy of it. And hopefully you'll like it, and no pressure. But if you'd like it, you can review it. If you're not, you can just say thanks. Fair enough.
Wow. I look forward to reading it.
Thank you.
Definitely. That
Thank
sounds
you.
very fascinating.
Yeah, there are some very interesting stories in there that are very moving. They're very real about the world that we lived in and the world that still exists. But the experiences, the war experiences, the emotions of it after coming back and living in a culture and a society that scorned men in uniform rather than embracing them back the way it had in previous wars.
Hmm.
And, all of those traumatic things that you have to overcome in life. And I am the child of an alcoholic. So I also describe in there how I spent many years in rooms called ACOA, the Adult Children of Alcoholics, and the recovery program that I had to go through, not because of my addiction, but because of the impact on my personality and my emotions by the addictive parent, and very interesting stuff. Some of it's very heavy, some of it's very light and laughable and enjoyable. But I think you'll find reality in there, real stuff.
Excellent.
So we're down to 33 minutes. My producer likes to put in little photos and clips and things like that. So we're going to narrow down the conversational part of it. I'm going to give you a few minutes to say anything you'd like to say to the people out there, recognizing that it's my show and you can't offend them on my show. They'll only be angry at me. So say whatever you want.
I like these kind of open-ended questions. I ask people these all the time. I would just say, increasingly, one of the most important things that you can do, if you know something that is true, if you know that it's true and you feel that sharing that thing is the right thing to do, the absolute worst thing you can do is be silent. God gave you a voice. He gave you a brain. Do not silence yourself, and definitely do not say something that you know to be false to appease somebody. I think if more people followed this, we would have a much better country and a better world. And I think we are starting to break through to that a little. And I say more of that. Don't feel in any way that you can't speak the truth, because you can.
Absolutely believe that. I absolutely believe that. I think that for too long, we've been quiet to a very vocal minority who have frightened people into thinking they can't say, I don't believe that, or I don't agree with that, or I
Right.
don't see that as truth, or I know full well that's a lie. So many people have stepped back for fear because of this time that we've had in this nation with this woke stuff and this anti this stuff and anti that stuff. Anybody that talks to you and they have an anti attitude, whether it's anti white, anti black, anti Jewish, anti this, anti that, cast them off. We don't need
Right.
people like that in this country. We just don't. We need positive people. We need positive speaking and positive. And as Paul said, if you know something to be true, if you know it's a truism, you have an obligation to yourself, to this country, to our downline history, to the people who come after us. We have a responsibility to stand on the truth and make it known. Let everybody in the sound of your voice know that there is something better than this negative stuff. So
Right.
I'm going to say to you what I say every week. I know you have a story. I just said the same thing to Paul. I know you have your own story. Everybody has their own story. As I've traveled around this world, I've found out that the stories are magnificent and they inspire people in ways that you can't imagine until you speak it out. So I encourage you. Tell your story to your loved ones, to your friends. Write it down. Send it to the newspaper. Send copies of the story to the local television network. Get on podcasts like this. Speak it out to your core of people. Because when it's too late, it's too late. All that wisdom is gone. And the world needs this wisdom. It's precious. We need to have it. We need to share it with one another. So tell your story. And I will say one other thing that I say every week. What do I know? I'm this big guy from Brooklyn. I don't know from nothing. But, I'm just this guy from Brooklyn. But I know one thing to be true. Get somebody you know today and wrap them in a bear hug. Tell them you love them. Tell them you love them.
Yeah.
It may be the only time they hear those words. Tell them you love them. And I'm quite sure God does also. So you know what I'm doing to you right now, Paul, right? I love you, man. And that's it.
Love you too, man.
God bless. Thank you so much for coming on our show. Ladies and gentlemen, make sure you follow up with Paul. He's got so much more for you to hear about and to see. Follow him. God bless and have a wonderful new year, everyone.
A wonderful new year to you all.
Ciao.
God bless you all. God bless you, Carl.
And God bless you, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you.